My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Coy Zimmerman. We're at his home. It's January 23rd, 2020. Thank you so much for joining us today, Coy. We appreciate this. Let's start by asking a little bit about your background. Tell me about your early life, where you grew up before Linfield.
Well, I was born and raised in Vancouver, out in the Evergreen district. At that time, Evergreen wasn't anything like it is now. If you've been out that area, my grandmother had a grocery store out on Mill Plain, and in fact, the house that I was born in or raised in is a real estate office now, and is still standing right there on 162nd and Mill Plain. And but anyway, after graduation at Evergreen, I went to Washington State for a year. Didn't do the best job in the classroom and had some health problems, and so I had an uncle that had gone to Linfield, and that's how I kind of found out about Linfield. And so I went to Linfield then in 55 was my first year at Linfield. And I was just a walk-on. I had played high school football, but we ran a single wing, and so I was an offensive lineman. And my desire and goal was always to play quarterback, and I wasn't getting very close to it. So, and I got involved with football down at Linfield because one weekend, the varsity was playing, I think it was the College of Idaho or in Walla Walla, I'm not sure. But David Lum, I think it was the fella that came up. I had a kid that I was rooming with by the name of George Davison, who wasn't playing football, but he had played at Taft High School. And he said, "We got a ball game with George Fox today. Can you guys play?" So they put pads on us, and we went over to George Fox and played in their homecoming game. I believe we won 13-12. I think that was correct. But it made me realize that Linfield had a JV program. So that's when I kind of decided, well, I was planning to go into coaching, and so I'd go out and maybe play a couple years of JV football and JV basketball, and then help me from that standpoint. And I got a little bit fortunate. I was right behind Ron Parrish and right ahead of Bill Parrish, and so there was a little bit of time in between there where I got a chance to play a little bit, and that was
at quarterback.
Yeah, and that was kind of the way the thing got going, and just met a whole lot of great guys, and it was a really good experience for me.
So I'm curious, tell me about if you remember your first impressions of Linfield or of McMinnville when you got there as a student.
Well, like I say, I had an uncle that had been in the war and in Second World War, and he went to school down there, and so I went down a couple of different times when he was going to school and watched a couple of ball games. And in fact, one of the fellas, a guy by the name of John Dowd, graduated from Linfield, was a GI, and he got a job at Evergreen High School when Marilee and I were in school, and so I played basketball for him I think he was there 2 years before he moved down to California someplace. But so I had an idea of the school and what to expect from that standpoint. My first room was right there in the stadium where they had used to, I don't know if they still have people living in those rooms or not, but George Davison from Taft and I were roommates, and so it was just, I just enjoyed the people that were there, and And I felt like after going to Washington State, at least I felt like I was part of something. And it was a real friendly atmosphere. And Durham and Helser and Smith and all the coaches were always so, people that talked to you. You weren't just working with graduate students. So I just enjoyed the experience that I had. I did play JV basketball that first year, but I didn't play football until, my first year for football was in '56. And I don't remember exactly, but we probably played, 5 or 6 JV games.
Tell me about what you remember from classes. What was your major? Were there any memorable classes or professors while you were there?
I majored in PE, and I also took quite a number of math classes, had a minor in math. I can't remember his name. He taught World Lit, was one of the, I just don't remember the professors' names, but I was real impressed with his classes and what they expected from you, and then also there was a math teacher that took real good interest in us and was willing to help us and that kind of thing. And so all the way along, my experiences in the classroom definitely improved after my 1 year at Washington State, that was for sure. And, it worked out pretty well. Then, after Parrish graduated and I had a chance of starting in football, I went in and talked to Durham about possibly getting a little help, which he turned me down, which was to be expected. But he offered me the opportunity to, as a graduate assistant, if I wanted to stay another year, to coach football. And so I ended up coaching in the year I graduated. I graduated then in '60. So in '59, I coached football and then JV basketball. And then he helped me a great deal when I went out to try to find a job. I ended up getting a job with Ad Rutschman over at Hillsborough, and I couldn't have asked for a better teacher. And I see that Ad's still out and about and doing things, and I saw him down, or I saw him. I didn't go down and go through the parade or the tunnel with him, but I saw him when we went down for the homecoming.
So after you got started, kind of by happenstance playing football at Linfield, tell me about your experiences beyond the rest of the time in your career there, as you kind of grew into football. Were there memorable moments for you, memorable games or teammates?
Well, of course, I roomed with Jerry Beyer for a year. That was when they first built that new dorm just across from the stadium. It's been there for...
Anderson?
That, I think so. I'm not exactly sure. But, and I roomed with Jerry that 1 year. And then in some way, and I don't really remember exactly how we got close to Vic, but all of a sudden one time he showed up and wanted me to be his best man in his wedding, and Vic was a different cat. He was a real different fella from the standpoint that I don't think he had much of a home life. He pretty well grew up in a fire station. Where in the heck was it he lived?
Cottage Grove.
Okay, Cottage Grove, yeah. And but he was really a bright man, because he wouldn't buy books. He would say, well, we're going to go to the movie or something. And he'd come over a little bit early, grab my book and read the chapter and have it all down. And I mean, that was the way he operated. Kind of a side story. It was kind of funny. We were in Glacier National Park here 2 or 3 years ago. And we were waiting for the little bus deal, and got to talking to some other people sitting there. And these people were from Molalla. Oh, is that right? Did you know Vic Fox? Oh, God, I played ball for Vic Fox. And this guy went on, about Vic and how, I don't think Vic ever changed. He was just hard-nosed as back then as he ever was. And it was kind of interesting to run into somebody like that.
Tell me about the actual playing of football. What position were you playing? You started as offensive lineman and worked your way towards quarterback. What was it like playing those positions in the 1950s?
Well, I got a chance to, I didn't play anything but the backfield or the quarterback when I got down to Linfield. That first year, and I don't remember how the rule changed, but we were still playing a lot of both sides of the football. And one of the other quarterbacks, Lou Littlejohn, I don't know if you're going to be able to talk to him or not, he was more of a defensive player than I was. And so, like with some of the longer trips and so forth, he was usually selected to go because of his ability to play on the defensive side of the ball. But it just gave me an opportunity, and I got to play a heck of a lot of football that way. We had a number of fellas, that were GIs. Don Tank was one that I think Don had 4 children. Terry Picknell, was it Picknell? It was a big tackle for us. I think his brother ran cross country at Oregon or something, or was a distance runner at Oregon. And but one year, Beaverton, and I think it was my first year, but it might have been a second. Beaverton High School had won their conference. It was going into the playoffs. And they had a bye date the last day, and they wanted a game. And for some reason, they set us up to go over and play Beaverton High School. And my Lord, I mean, here we got a fella that had been in the war with 4 kids playing guard for us. I mean, it was such an unfortunate thing. They had a running back, I think it was Sinanu or something like that, but he was a real good back. But you don't put kids against men, and there were a number of them, and that really left an impression on me as to thinking, what are you doing to try to get another game for these kids like that? But it was just a good experience. We played Pacific. I always had a JV team, and they were real competitive, and it was just a good league to be in everything. Football, College Idaho had the Owens kid about that time. Lewis and Clark had a McDaniels, I think it was a kid like that. Great athletes. I mean, good high school or college athletes. And we were the same way in both football and basketball and baseball too. It was just a great opportunity for me, and I enjoyed it.
So in 1956, the varsity team, obviously for Linfield, won the league title, began the streak.
Right.
Obviously, the first league title in a long time, and a winning season. Do you have any memory of how things, what changed that year? What was special about 1956?
We just had a good bunch of kids. That group of guys, the Byers and Parrish and Vic and all that group, were stayed together. That was, I think, a big thing. And they had 2 or 3 people that came on in and played for them. Umbarger, Vern Marshall, who I ran into Vern a lot when he was officiating basketball up around here, and he passed away here a number of years ago now. But I mean, they were just they were men, and they treated people that way. It was a good experience from that standpoint. And just the fact that I walked on and I was a JV player, that didn't make any difference to them. I was just part of the group. So, that was pretty well where it was. And we followed up with classes coming right in behind them and did very well. And they've done exceptionally well from then on. I don't remember what year it was that they won their first championship, but they, nationally went up. But
84, 82?
Yeah,
1982.
Yeah, but they've had some. I was impressed with the kid they had this year throwing the ball. My good golly, he threw the ball all over the park.
You talked a little bit earlier about the coaches, about Coach Durham and the others. Tell me a little bit about them, maybe first impressions of them and sort of what you took away from Coach Durham and the others as you were going on to become a coach yourself.
Well, Durham was always the gentleman. He was a very religious man and very involved in the church down there. And but he always had class to him. He wasn't your buddy, but he was a guy you could talk to at any time and run things by him. When I did my graduate work, I worked with him helped him as an aide in one of his classes that he had, and he was just always the same guy. He supported athletics. He was one of the first football coaches that I ever heard of that would encourage guys to play baseball. And he thought there was a real correlation between your reaction in baseball and your reaction in football, where most coaches would encourage the kids to go out for track, which he never discouraged, but he just had a real love for the game of baseball and the athletes. And you can go through, I don't know how many guys that were, they were 2 and some of them 3 sport athletes. Vern Marshall was in all 3 sports. Jerry Byers was all conference in both baseball and football. And there was a lot of them that were involved in more than one sport. And he encouraged it. And it was enjoyable. I really did enjoy it.
So tell us about your career after Linfield. What did you do after graduating?
Well, like I say, I got a real break. I got a job over at Hillsborough with Ad, teaching driver's training, but I was also able to coach both our football. I actually coached football, basketball, and track at that time. And Rutch was the kind of guy that everything had to have a reason, a purpose. I can recall going up to Seattle one time to a clinic, and their car broke down. And so I brought some of the Linfield coaches back down with us. And our whole discussion was, how can we improve each position? He was just meticulous as far as wanting to do everything the correct way. And it was that way even when I first started over there. He was coaching both football and baseball, and had ended up winning state championships in one year from baseball, one spring, and then football the next year. He was just a real teacher. And when I got an opportunity then to go to Vancouver in '62, that was the year Columbia River High School opened up in Vancouver. And so I went over there as an assistant football coach and baseball coach, and we started out with sophomores. We had the junior high school and the sophomore class, and then so I was there 12 years working. I had baseball for 7 and then head football for 5. And then I moved from there back over to actually Centennial High School at that time. But Rutch was the first one to, encourage me to go ahead and take the baseball job over at Columbia River, even though that was probably the least sport that I had actually played. But it worked out pretty well. We did fairly well. After that, one of the coaches that was at Centennial had won the state championship, and their coach went up as an assistant or as a assistant principal, Don McCarty. And Bob Holt, who was an assistant at Evergreen, took the head job, and I got a chance to come over and work with him. At that time, Centennial was part of the Gresham district. And then after I was there 2 years or 3 years, Centennial split and became their own district, and I had an opportunity to go to Barlow or stay at Centennial. And Dale Stebbins, who ended up the head baseball coach at Mount Hood, left Barlow and opened up a position there for me to be able to get on with. That was when John Harrington was the head coach out of Barlow. And so it worked out real well for me in terms of schools and the people and the whole and we kept fairly close to Linfield, but you get your own family going and your own sports and that kind of thing, and they never did figure out a short way to get to Linfield from here. So we ended up not going down a lot and staying in touch with guys, but I'd see them at clinics and that type of thing.
I'm curious with your kind of early education by coaches like Durham and Helzer and Ad Rutschman, what did you take away as you kind of grew into being your own coach? What were the lessons you took from them that you wanted to make sure that were part of your coaching philosophy?
Well, I always enjoyed the coaching part of it. I probably was never very good as far as a game day type coach. I like to have things organized in terms of our practices, and that was the way Durham was, and Helzer was that way, and Helzer was a little looser with basketball than what Durham was a little bit more Ad, and but I think that was the biggest thing is I tried to always be prepared. On a daily basis. I wanted to know, when we're going to do this and when we're going to do that. I didn't like the idea of extending periods of time when just because I got ticked off because the kids weren't doing something. That I tried to avoid that type of thing. Rutch also was one that I can remember when he had a quarterback a lineman, I can't remember his name, and there was 3 kids. One was a receiver. And you'd come in at night after practice, and if it was raining and muddy out, and those 3 kids would stand out there and play backyard football against each other in the mud. And Rutch just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. I mean, and these kids were real critical parts of their ball club. One was the quarterback. He also was a baseball pitcher for him. And but he was just that kind of a person. He liked the kids to be involved, and I tried to do a lot the same kind of thing.
You mentioned sort of keeping tabs on Linfield as an alum. Not always super close. So I'm kind of curious what your experience has been following the Linfield football program as an alum and watching it grow into what it's become today.
Well, I've been impressed, very impressed. I mean, to see school, I don't know how large a school it is right now, but to see those kids go down there and have the numbers out year after year, I don't know, I haven't followed it to the point to know whether they still have a JV team or a JV program or not. But they've got to have something going when you've got that many kids and you keep that many kids involved. And again, this goes back to Rutch, I think, and somewhat with Durham, but also with Rutch in that you very seldom see them make mistakes in terms of not having the right number of people on the field or things like that. When you think you have that many kids, you'd think you would have some problems from that standpoint. But they keep them. I mean, it's really interesting to watch. And I try to follow them as far as keeping up with the scores and that type of thing. But we haven't got down there like I'd like to have.
What is it like watching a game today, playing days?
Well, of course, your equipment and all that type of thing is so much different. And when we first started, that's when we had those thick, solid, they weren't a plastic, I don't know exactly what they were, face-type masks that they had at that time. Vic was one that used to try to see if he couldn't break his mask so that he'd get another shot in before they sent him to the sideline to replace his helmet. I mean, he was a different cat, but that was the first time I'd actually seen a face mask on a football helmet before. That when we got down there, so it just I'm still impressed with the numbers, the size of the kids. My God, that backfield that I played with, of course, I was about 175, and Zell Spray was maybe 180 or 185, and Bill Kottman was probably 165 or 70. I mean, and our linemen were the same thing. I don't think Howie Morris was ever over 200 pounds, and he played guard and a linebacker. Vic was big, and he was probably 215 or 220. So that's a big thing right there, the size of kids. We didn't have any organized program from the standpoint of weight training or anything like that. You went out for other sports. They did have a weight room in the gym upstairs. There was an upstairs gym, and there was a weight room down at the one end. And we had some stuff in there, and there was quite a number of guys that would get in there and work out. It was just something we did, but it wasn't that we had to do it. It was something we did because that's what we wanted to do. And you just never felt like you were being pressured to do anything. You were it was there available for you. If we can help you, we will. If you need something, we'll try to get it for you. But, it was a real casual way to go to school. Yeah.
Do you remember at what point you became aware of the streak? Obviously, you started it. It can't be a streak until you've had a few years. Do you have an idea when it became something you were aware of?
I don't remember exactly when it was, but there was something done nationally in national media where it was brought up and mentioned. Now, that was a number of years ago now, but that was in the newspaper or it was on the radio or something, and it was mentioned that Linfield was at that time 25 straight years, or I don't remember exactly where it was, but I do remember that coming up at that time. I knew that they'd done well every year, but I just never really thought of it in terms of a streak. And I think that was brought out nationally this last fall, too, if I remember right.
So now we're 64 years into the streak now. I'm curious what it means to you looking back to have been part of the beginning of something like that.
Well, it gets bigger all the time. I'd like to say I was contributed a little more than I did, but it does. I mean, you look back on it, and it's a pretty big deal as far as being part of something like that.
So, for someone who maybe wasn't familiar with Linfield, but was aware of the streak, what would you want them to take away from it? What does it mean for 64 straight winning seasons?
Well, I think it's something you got to be proud of, and I don't know how much emphasis the experiences that I've had, there wasn't a lot of emphasis put on it. It wasn't something that they kept throwing in your face and saying, this is what you've got to do. Other people made more of it than the players that I've been associated with or have known. There've been a number of kids from not just Barlow, but Gresham and Sandy and places like this that have ended up going to school down there. And I've never heard any of them even mention the fact that we're a part of a streak. This is what we expect to do. We expect to win. And I think that's probably where more emphasis is in terms of the players are concerned than anything else. It's important to win. That's what you're down there to do. And it always amazed me is the numbers, because I don't know what kind of a recruitment program they have now, but I think most of the recruiting was done by coaches that were out in the field and working in the high schools, and they're the ones that brought it up to different kids, and we had quite a few kids that came over from Hawaii. That whole conference seems to have a lot of kids from Hawaii that comes in. I know Durham, after he retired, he lived over in Hawaii for a number of years, and I think, in fact, one of the coaches, Wills, he, I think, ended up being the athletic director of one of those big private schools over there that's had a real success with their athletes. We had a situation one year where there was a group of Hawaiian kids that came over, and one was just a little guy. He probably didn't weigh 145 pounds, but he was just quicker than a cat. And about the first time he saw the football field, and at that time they had the crown on the field to try to keep drainage, and he looked at that and he says, I don't run uphill. I don't run uphill. He didn't last long. He didn't even last through doubles because he just didn't like the looks of that field. and I can't remember what his name was, but he would. Durham had some real contacts, I think, there too. And then he had some contacts with kids from back in Connecticut. We had a number of kids that came out, and they were amazing because they actually were, we were told, or I was told, that they would actually have classes for them before they let them come out here to go to school as to dress, act, all of these kind of things. And they came in, they were gentlemen. You really were a great group of kids. I think there was one that played football and the other two that played basketball, if I remember right. But, there was, again, contact that Durham had with people from around different parts of the country. And of course, Helser, he was back with professional baseball, and he was something else. His association with football was basically to play cards when we went on trips. He was a great coach, and he was a great guy, but he wasn't involved with the football program from a coaching standpoint.
It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me, as you look ahead, what is your kind of hope for the future for Linfield as a school and then for Linfield football specifically? What do you hope to see in the future?
Well, I'd love to see them try to improve that stadium setup. If they, I think they've done a great deal with what they've been able to do. The facility looks really nice. Now, I understand they've got a new weight room facility. I just don't move around very well, and so we didn't get over to see it. But I think with their field house situation that they've got set up, they've done a great deal, and it's not just football; it's their athletic program, and that's big time. And I haven't been over to Lewis and Clark or Pacific or those, but with George Fox has got a program that's pretty competitive, and I think that's a pretty competitive conference, that Northwest Conference.
When someone says Linfield, what does that mean to you? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Linfield?
Well, I'm pretty proud of, being able to say that I'm a graduate of it, and they've helped me out quite a bit. In fact, I had a cousin whose granddaughter just graduated from Linfield here a couple of years ago, and so it's a place that I've enjoyed, and I would recommend anybody that, as far as their schooling is concerned, I think they've got a great job going. But, it's just, I really haven't been close to the school in terms of academically or athletically what they've been doing the last 20 years, for example. But
good memories.
Wonderful memories, yeah. Yeah, and your little letter and so forth, made me go back and jog my memory quite a bit too, and I'd like to be a little more aware of where some of the guys were and what they've done, but I have seen them every once in a while.
You got my equipment question.
You did get your equipment question.
But do you remember what about your offense? Like, describe what kind of plays did you guys run on offense?
Well, we were, at that time you were running basically a run type passing or run type offense with 2 or 3 backs in the backfield. We had, and I'm thinking more in terms of when I was playing more. Zell Spray was a kid from, I think he was from LeGrand. I believe that. He had a brother, younger brother too, and he was just a horse. It wasn't very big, but he was tougher than heck. And we ran a lot of like a belly type play, riding the ball into him, and then usually we would then either hand to another back coming behind it. It was just a regular belly series. We ran quite a bit of which would be considered to be a fly pitch or a toss type thing that we had with just turning and pitching quickly to our tailback or our backs going out. We didn't run from a tailback type situation. It was strictly a tee, modified tee. Bill Parrish was a real good thrower. Ron Parrish was a real good, Bill too, but Ron was a better passer. And we did a lot of play action type passes. We normally had at least one tight end, and we used our tight ends a great deal in terms of short passing game off of the play action type passes. That was the big thing. It was a running type offense, and then play action passes off from that.
Are there any traditions that you remember as a player or student at Linfield?
They used to have a tug of war across the creek. I managed to stay out of that, but they used to have that. I guess it was a tradition. I don't remember who the traditions were. Of course, the old pop shop, that was always a place where a lot of kids hung out. And but it wasn't, when you go to a big school like Washington State and those places, they've had all these different activities set up. This was just more the guys are getting together. It wasn't any one group. I never felt that there were groups of people that were kind of at each other's throat. That just wasn't part of it. Of course, now at that time we had a lot of GIs that were coming back, and they were, they had families and they weren't out trying to raise Cain with the kids and that kind of thing. It made a big difference. There was some real stability among a lot of those fellas, and I felt it. Terry Picknell and Don Tank started a business, and a cleaning business. They got, I forget who it was, but there was a cleaning outfit, and they got a job there, a part-time job while they was going to school, and they ended up, by the time they graduated, having their own business. And I think it went this way. I think Don bought Terry out, and then he actually sold it after he graduated, and made a pretty good profit off of it. It was a pretty good business, but that was the kind of fellas that we had there. It wasn't just a bunch of kids.
That's all we have for you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today, for telling us your memories, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Well, I appreciate your coming, and good luck on your little project, and I'll be interested to see how things do work out with it.
You and me both.